There we go. All right, take it away, Mark.
Thanks, Kim. I'll start the presentation now. So I think some of you have seen something about SLSA before. I think maybe some of you haven't. So I'll give a brief update on what SLSA is, and then talk about recent changes since the last time I spoke to this group. The GitHub repo is github.com/SLSA-framework/SLSA for anyone who wants to follow along. This presentation is not available right now just because of doc sharing makes it a little bit challenging, but we could share it afterward. So I'll kind of go over what SLSA is in a minute, but briefly for anyone who's familiar with it, we've simplified the model. We dropped the kind of notion of a resource, de-emphasized the notion of policy, and made it a lot more streamlined. We also updated the requirements based on feedback and added a new intermediate level. The suggested signing mechanism has been, which is part of in-toto, has a V1 release, which I'll mention. And we also have a GitHub Actions demo for how you can get to SLSA 1 today if you build with GitHub Actions. Feel free to interrupt with questions. I don't have the faces on the screen right now, so I won't be able to see if anyone's trying to interrupt, so just say something.
I can help too.
So briefly, we model a software supply chain looking something like this. A developer submits source code, they build that, and that also pulls in some dependencies. That the output of that, let's call a package for without loss of generality. And then that package is either used as another dependency of some other build or by some other consumer in some other way. And we also call out that the source build and kind of packaging have a platform, which is like whatever infrastructure is used to do that. So there's some sort of source control, some sort of build, CI/CD, something like that, some sort of distribution like PyPy or something like that. Usually, it doesn't have to be, but often there is. And our concern is mainly around is supply chain integrity, which is to prevent tampering, meaning unauthorized modifications to software. And we break it up into two main groups. One is source integrity, which is like the stuff up to and including source control. So either a developer submitting bad code or the source control platform getting compromised and serving bad code in some way. And then after that, labeled C through H, is what we're calling build integrity, which is after it's already been submitted, other types of tampering. And I'm happy to walk through that if anyone's interested, but for time, I'll just skip it for now. And SLSA is intended to address all of these threats. We have a series of incremental levels, 1, 2, 3, and 4, where each level, like the lowest level is the lowest level of protection, and the highest level is the most protection and address the most of those threats and to the strongest degree. I'm happy to talk about any of the levels if anyone's interested. They're a little bit updated from last time. But roughly, SLSA 1, which is a new level that we've inserted in the beginning, is just unsigned provenance, where provenance means that there's some metadata about how some software artifact was generated. We decided to have this as a very first level, where the only requirements are that the build is scripted in some way, that you're not just running manual commands. Like this could be as simple as running make. Ideally, it would be hosted, but it doesn't have to be. And you generate provenance saying where you generated this thing from, which allows people to kind of analyze it. There's no integrity protections at this level. Someone could tamper with it, but it kind of gets you on the path forward, and it already provides some benefits. At level 2, we require moving to some sort of hosted source and build platform. The benefits of this is that it moves us to a higher level and kind of decreases like the number of entities who we have to trust. You only have to, there's like not that many source and build platforms out there, but there's many, many, many different software projects. And so overall, we're just trying to reduce like the attack surface. And it's at this level that we add signing to the provenance. And another thing is, because there's not that many platforms, the key management becomes a little bit easier at this level. But otherwise, there's no particular requirements on how those platforms are implemented. At the higher levels, 3 and 4, which we're less certain about, I think all of these are subject to change based on feedback, but we're less certain about 3 and 4. We have a series of or a set of controls that the source and the build platform have to implement to make the provenance more trustworthy, which prevents certain types of attacks of someone kind of falsifying the information that's in the provenance. Like, for example, if there's 2 builds that are running concurrently, doing an RPC from one to the other for like reading its memory or something like that. And at level 3, those threats have to be addressed. And 4 is the highest level, which in our current form requires 2-party review on source and hermetic and reproducible builds. On the build side, I think the level 4 is certainly the one that's most subject to change, because like David, for example, has said that 2-party review is in most open source projects is going to be a no-go. Similarly, hermetic builds might be very, very difficult to implement in many cases. So we're leaving it there just to kind of indicate the direction that we're going. But today, no one externally meets this. Internally within Google, I forgot to mention, this has been all modeled on what we have done internally within Google for the last number of years. So internally, we have something that is roughly equivalent to SLSA 4, but it doesn't translate externally.
If I can interrupt real quick. Yeah, I think it was just before you came in, Mark, I mentioned that the best practices working group is making a list of various documents that try to identify best practices for developing or delivering secure software, and SLSA is already on that list.
Okay, nice. And thanks, David. David was extremely helpful in providing feedback, and we implemented many, but not yet all of his suggestions.
David, have you had a chance to see like the table a bit more fleshed out yet? Put you on the spot.
This table right here?
Yeah, like the requirements table on the right. We had a lot of like TBD and things that we were kind of contemplating, when we first pushed out the repo, and then we wanted to flesh them out a bit more. So
right, I commented on that version. I haven't gone back. I noticed that Mark has, I've noticed that a number of changes have been made to the document since I commented on it, but I have not gone back. And to be fair, I mean, I send in comments. I have no expectation that everyone will always agree with anybody, including me.
Sure.
So I take no offense if Mark disagrees with me on something. My goal was to hopefully be helpful.
No, and very helpful.
Yeah, and the 2-party review, just since Mark's already noted it, the problem isn't that people think 2-party review is a bad idea. The problem is that there's a lot of small projects where there's really only one person. And it's very hard to implement 2-person controls with one person.
I think another issue that we've realized is that at least I didn't understand how difficult 2-party review is with currently available tools. Like, I'm used to the tools that internally we have within Google, which are very good, and it really makes the 2-party review process quite seamless. The state of the art is quite good, but when you use tools publicly, like personally, I find GitHub pull requests to not be particularly efficient in terms of my time and utility. And I imagine other platforms similarly have other friction that could be eliminated long-term, but right now, I think that could be another source of resistance that if implemented with like the ideal tooling, it could be low friction, but given the friction that currently exists, maybe people might not like it.
Yeah. maybe the correct solution here is to improve the tooling so that it's easier to do. I think that's actually often the right solution if tooling's a solution, but it doesn't solve the I don't have someone else
Yes,
problem.
yeah, true. Yeah, you still need a body and still a process that you have to follow.
I guess like I would like to just reiterate, I do feel like two-party review is important. Like it's probably one of the more important controls. And I wonder if there's a way to brand this so that it can still be captured in SLSA without like excluding people who are single person projects. For example, maybe it's sort of a separate dimension. Like maybe there's a new level that's SLSA 4 with two-party review. So, you know, that's separated out.
Yeah, I think I'm certainly open to other ideas around, because right now two-party review, where every change is reviewed prior to submission, is fairly prescriptive. It might be good to reframe this in terms of the threats we want to address. Like it's not possible for someone to get something submitted by themselves. And there could be, in some repos, it could be that there's sufficient eyeballs on every single change that such sort of bad changes are detected quickly enough that even though there's not technically two-party review prior to submission, it's good enough. I'd be open to considering that type of thing.
Yeah, there is actually but please forgive me. I'm trying to represent a position I don't actually agree with. So, but there is a mode of thought, and a number of folks involved in the NPM community are big on this. Of if someone has proposed anything at all, let them make changes, and we'll fix it after the fact.
I mean, fair enough, but I feel like the control here to me seems like no obviously malicious changes are going to reach a release stage without at least two people being in on the malice, right?
Yeah, let's just say that this is the reason I'm trying to represent a position I don't agree with, because I actually don't believe that happens in such systems. I'm sure that they will disagree with me. So, but I think trying to say, hey, after I've accepted it, after 1,000 changes have gone in, I'm going to review after the fact. Really?
Yeah.
I think another aspect here is that it might be the case, like assuming that we do keep it as is, because as Mike said, like we're his principle that he described, I think is well phrased. Is that it might just be that some projects don't get to SLSA 4, right? Single maintainer projects, maybe they just can't be SLSA 4, and critical projects shouldn't rely on them, right? If there is some piece of software that has outsized impact on the security of the internet, maybe we should have more than one maintainer for that project.
Or the people taking dependency on those things, maybe they become the reviewers. That's how I read it. As long as we've had the data available, which I don't think we really have today in an easy way, people can start making their own decisions on, if they're going to trust that artifact or not, because it only has one maintainer.
Just FYI, just to put all the cards on the table for the CI best practices badge, the way that we attempted to deal with this was for gold. At least half of the proposals have to be reviewed by somebody else. That obviously does require someone else. So obviously that does exclude a number of projects from getting the top. But I think the notion here is very much the same as was just discussed here. It's okay that some projects can't make the top, because that gives you a signal that there's maybe I need to deal with it. I think the challenge is there's a lot of small projects that lots of people depend on. If you look at a lot of these NPM projects that pull in projects, are you really expecting a second person to do odd and even? So there just aren't. There are a lot of small projects, and a lot of them just, it's not obvious. They have not decided there's a need for a second person. Now you can make the case that that's a great way for malware to get in, and and you need to have, you should have a second person, but that's been the challenge historically.
Okay, so I'm always happy to talk more about this, but I'll move on to the next pieces, and at the end we could discuss more in detail. There's a list of things that are changed for anyone who's truly familiar. I could talk about them if you're interested, but we kind of talked about the main things from before. Basically, we just cleaned up the table. There used to be a bunch of different symbols all over the place. Now it's just streamlined. For the most part, checkboxes, except for the optionality of reproducible and the retention on level 3. Another thing I wanted to highlight is that the recommended but not required provenance signature envelope piece was now finalized for V1. This is in the in toto, the way in toto attestations and provenance are signed. We now have, we kind of clean that up for anyone who's interested. I can talk about the details, but this was called IT5 for anyone who's following along. And the last thing I'll mention is that we have a GitHub Actions demo to allow anyone who wants to generate Salsa now, or to become Salsa 1 now, to do so. We plan on, let me zoom in a little bit so you can actually see my screen. We plan on expanding this more over time and kind of doing more demos and making it easier to reach Salsa for regardless of what platform you use. But we just started with this one. So the idea is that you put this little snippet in your GitHub Actions workflow, and we have a little action that you use, and then it outputs provenance called build.provenance, and then you could upload that wherever, and make it available to the software consumers. We're calling this a demo because there's still the question of like, how do you actually get it to the consumer? And that's something that I think we have to work out as a framework. But it's certainly like a first step, and get something in people's hands that they could actually see and play around with and make use of. So as always, we're looking for feedback and contributions. So far, it's been mostly us on the Google side doing changes here, but we again want to make this like a community thing, that we want to make sure that the requirements that we're doing and the framework that we're doing is actually meeting people's security needs. And if you disagree with us, then we want to catch that earlier rather than later. And we're also working on further demos / proof of concepts that kind of making Salsa real, writing code, actually generating provenance, actually consuming provenance, etc. So that's all I have for now.
So it sounds like the goal here is homework for everybody is please go back and take a look and put some feedback in. Do you have a particular deadline for when you'd like to get that next wrap up? I mean, I'm sure comments anytime, but is there a particular time you'd like to see comments by?
No, Kim, I don't think we have any particular deadline.
No, I mean, I think when we start seeing people try to implement these things or play around with the proof of concept, and if things don't make sense, they don't understand how to do something, why do we do something like that type of thing, I think is the most valuable, because I think that's what will get us to really making sure we got the table and criteria right in there. I think the other part, and I was chatting with Mark about this a little bit yesterday, we really like that threats diagram. We did push out a blog post that maps that threats diagram to like real
world
tracks. And I think maybe even that could use some looks and like, what did we miss? Did we capture everything? I think the tricky part is we couldn't figure out a good way to upload that diagram, and have people collaborate on it. Maybe my friends from projects from IF have an idea for making that diagram something that the community can sort of contribute to. And so I think that was the other thing that I had and was thinking about.
Yeah, we have like a list of GitHub issues of things that we want to do next, and certainly expanding the doc and better explaining like why those requirements, like even within like the core contributors, we're still kind of talking about how can we better explain this and get alignment on why are these requirements there, what specific threats are they addressing, etc. So there's still more work to do. It's far from final.
As far as that diagram goes, I created a somewhat similar diagram. We might want to cross compare. We had a couple more objects on it, although I think I could map they're pretty similar, which is probably not very surprising. We're looking at the same situations. We added just a few things. For example, we included the developer, and one of the risks there is the developer doesn't know how to do any of this stuff. And so the attack there is failure of knowledge. Thus, you need education and training. So you're one step to the left of what your diagram is.
It's like the developer's mind.
Yeah, that's right. The developer's mind is the first problem.
Opportunity.
Yeah, that's probably the better word. But yeah, we may. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that would be a useful thing to do a cross compare.
Sure.
I don't know if.
Could you share it with me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I will take that as an action. I mean, it's in a presentation I've got, I think is available to the world. Let me go find that thing. So somebody ask a question, stall for me.
I have a question. And the apologies if this has already been covered before and I just forgot, but what is the process for achieving sort of or getting like SLSA certified? Is it a self-attestation or will there be some sort of audit or what?
That is not worked out yet.
Okay.
And it's something we're kind of debating internally as well. I think there's kind of two aspects of the certification. One is, what do you call like any level, 1, 2, 3, 4, and like how do you actually achieve it? I can explain what's in my mind, but it's like not shared by everyone. So like take this as like my opinion and not like the consensus view. Is that there needs to be some sort of like just generating provenance, just generating data doesn't actually change any security value unless it's actually used and verified. And I've been calling this policy, although maybe that's not the best word for it. So like when a software consumer, at some point in the supply chain, either like at the distribution time, like the package repository, or at use time, makes a decision to accept or reject the software based on the provenance and some sort of criteria for what's acceptable. And so I think we need some guidelines on how that works in the SLSA framework. It's not present in the repo, but I think we need some guidance there. And that, I think, would just be like, here's the list of things, and we make recommendations. And if you use these implementations, we have claimed that those things meet the SLSA, but you could do it on your own. And it's up to you to convince yourself that you've covered these bases. So that's kind of one aspect. The other is specifically for SLSA 3 and above, we make requirements about how the host is implemented, particularly the build platform, but to a lesser extent the source platform. Like the builds are isolated and it's not possible to perform certain attacks. No amount of provenance is going to say that, because it's really just you're trusting that organization to implement that properly. And there, I think some sort of accreditation or auditing would be valuable. And I think it would always be up to the consumer of like, who do you trust? Like, do you just trust, say, Google or Amazon or Mozilla or whoever, whatever organization you're considering to do the right thing? And maybe there could be a third-party auditor that accredits that. I can see that happening, but we're a little bit early at that point. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say that yeah, I have worked on both edges of this spectrum here. I used to work with the common criteria for the NIAP. I also, of course, do the CI best practices badge, and there are pros and cons for everything. But the common criteria is very much the okay. Write down everything that why you think you meet this, and a third party auditor will review it and decide whether or not you meet it. The problem is that, at least for the common criteria, it was an incredible amount of time, an incredible amount of money. You could easily spend 6 months and a couple $100,000 was at the bare minimum, and you could easily move into 2-3 years and several $1,000,000. And when you multiply that by 3 million open source software projects, number is big num.
Yeah, I certainly don't know what the right thing to do is. I'm thinking like so for my company, Google, like what would we want? I don't think we'd want some sort of accreditation like all these various standards where it's like a bunch of kind of check boxes and someone accredits that you've met all these things, because those requirements are very difficult to write. You have to be super detailed. And if someone is trying to just do the bare minimum, like they're going to find ways to screw up the security, right? And
you can count on it.
Yes. And so I don't want to move SLSA in that direction, because like there's a lot of other stuff in that space. I don't think we'd be adding value there. Instead, I feel like it's more valuable to adding guidelines for what a company ought to look for. Like for Google, when we have a vendor and we say, here's the requirements you must meet, we already have some sort of process for vetting a particular vendor. This kind of adds more structure, and we could communicate these ideas in a more structured way.
How many of these could be automatically checked? At least in terms of most of the most common way to do something is X. I will check to see if X is applied.
I think at levels 1, 2, and 4, there are explicit things to check. And at level 3, I could represent the table. Well, I don't need to get buried into details. I think several of the things can automatically checked, and some of the things can't. Like the way the service is implemented can't. I can't conceive of a way that it could be automatically checked, unless we had some sort of trusted computing something or other, which would be a great way to go. Like some, I don't know what any of the terms are, but like, some hardware attestation, remote attestation, something or other. That could be a way to go, but that's like a long-term research project. That's not like something we could do immediately.
Yeah, because again, I'm drawing on current experiences, I think, like most of us. But for the CI badge, we first just what's important, whether or not it can be automated. But we did try, where reasonable, to look for ways to detect at least common cases. And we found that even if you can't detect them all, being able to detect common cases, if you can eliminate half the work, people appreciate it.
For sure. And Nan and Kim, like if you disagree with what I said, please jump in, because again, I'm speaking just from me and not intending to represent, or like in case there's diverging opinions, I don't want to say that my opinion is the sole one.
Yeah, I think where we've been diverging opinions is just that idea of like the enforcement, the policy piece, where I don't know if we need to be prescriptive, at least right now, about how folks are using this information. I just think there's so many different use cases for how people are going to apply their own policies or enforcements, or maybe some of the metadata and the provenance is more important to them. And so just sort of leaving that, open, at least in this part of the project, is how I've been thinking about it. But.
Yeah, and just simply having the provenance to trace something all the way back is valuable somewhat on its own, even if you're not doing runtime gate keeping policy based on it. It's something nobody can do today in open source, and it's hugely valuable just to unlock that potential.
Cool. Any other? Go ahead, David.
Yeah, let me act as the straight man, as it were. So, Mark, let's say that we read SLSA. We wanted to send you comments. How should we send them? Via GitHub issues, or what would you like?
Oh, thanks. It's at the top of the repo. We have GitHub issues works. It's probably the most preferable one because it's public and we could track it right in the site. We also have a Google group discussion and the feedback form. That's also acceptable if you prefer that, but GitHub issues is probably preferred.
TikTok video, David, if you're feeling.
Singing TikTok video.
There we go.
we still have that shanty to do, Cam.
Yes, I'm working on that.
If you work out the words, I'll sing with you.
I already did. I shared them with you.
Oh, you did. I missed it. I missed
Wow.
that somehow. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. My apologies. I will need to go back and check that.
Priorities.
All right. So GitHub issues prefer, and was it a Google Groups, Mark?
Yeah, there's a Google group linked at the second paragraph of the thing. SLSA -discussion. Although I don't think anyone's used it before. I think it's currently an empty group. Everyone just uses GitHub issues.
Cool. Any other comments, thoughts, feedback? No? Any other topics to discuss today? We're good? All right. Thank you, Mark. I guess we'll end early. Thanks, everyone. And I'll
Thank you
post
so
the
much, Mark.
recording on YouTube. Okay, see ya.